Orleans. On Tuesday night at the club I was playing at, there was a drive-by shooting. Thank God that nobody was injured, but the shooting happened just about a minute or two before midnight. I think my phone says that I called 911 about 11:59, which would have been immediately after the shooting, and there was no response really from police or paramedics, or even just in the news in the days following. There wasn't really any news coverage of it. I saw about 10 minutes after I had called 911, two NOPD police cruisers arrive at the scene and stop for maybe 5 to 10 seconds and then continue on their patrol. They didn't turn on their lights, exit their vehicles, interview anybody there. They didn't look for shell casings or evidence or anything like that. I don't know what the ongoing police report might be in terms of having spoken with maybe the owners of the building or the managers. There was damage to the building. There was a bullet hole in one of the windows on the front of the club. So I don't know if they'll need a police report to file that with an insurance claim or get that fixed.
Wow.
But that was basically the gist of what happened. It happened in a flash. I mean,
I mean, the show was over. So the venue that we were at, the Hi Ho Lounge, is pretty popular. I mean, it's a well-renowned club where a lot of like local and out-of-town musicians. The musician that Matt was playing with that night was a friend of his that lives out of town that came in just to play that show. And we also had some other friends who had family members that had come to see the show from out of town too. And the show had just finished, so it was just really weird. There's also like a food place that's attached to it. It's a pretty good taco spot, but it draws a pretty big crowd there. It's really busy and just a lot of people coming in and out of the club there. And so there was plenty of people standing outside the club by the taco stand, and then inside. I mean, everybody was just kind of hanging out after the show.
Do you all think there was more than 100 people, just like bystanders, between outside and inside?
Easily. I would say between 50 and 75 for sure. And yeah, I mean, there was a lot of people because there's like a patio area in the back that there was people.
And I would say even just within the vicinity. So
next door.
The way that it is situated is there's a main thoroughfare that runs east-west, and then there's a side street that runs north-south. And the club is on the corner, and then taco stand is behind it. And then just across the side street, there's a bar, and on the other side of that, there's a venue. And so there's always people around. And even in the neutral ground across the main street, there's people barbecuing and people cooking out and stuff, which if you're not from New Orleans, that's pretty typical in New Orleans. So I would say in the immediate, cross street vicinity, there was for sure 100 people that would have been around. And I think that's part of what makes it so scary is just that, we're blessed that it happened the way it did, that nobody was injured, but had the shooter decided to engage in a different way, either slowing down the vehicle, exiting the vehicle, had whoever the intended targets were, if they were armed and decided to respond, that could have easily have been a really tragic incident.
And y'all said that the police, after they showed up, they just left. They just showed up for a few minutes and then left. There was no, you didn't get questioned. You didn't see them.
Nope.
They didn't even get out the car.
They didn't exit their vehicles even. I saw them. They had rolled up on the side street and came up basically parallel to the club. And I stood there and I watched them. And I wondered what they were going to do. They didn't turn their lights on, exit the vehicles or anything. And then they turned out onto the main road and drove away. Now, we were only on the scene for maybe 25 minutes after the shooting. So it is possible that they could have come later.
But the club closed. Everybody was, the bartender was frazzled. The sound guy of the show was standing in the back, like his head was like inches from where the bullet hole came through.
Yeah, the sound man said he felt the bullet whiz by his head, and he had broken glass in his ear. So pretty close call. And I think, there were, in any shooting situation, it's not possible for police unless they're already present to respond within, a minute of the shooting, right? But to come by 10 minutes later and to not even stop and not have any presence there within 25 minutes, I think is completely shameful.
Wow.
And
how many, I mean, I don't know if you remember or not, stuff happens quick. How many bullets, like, or gunshots do you think you heard? Just one, like half a dozen?
No, like at least 20.
It was a lot.
And it was a automatic weapon. So, you know, where I was standing, I was inside the club looking towards the main street, and they have a door that opens onto the main street. And so there was maybe like a first round of shots, and then there was a second round, which was longer. And the second round, I could see the muzzle flash from the car as he was driving through the open door. It was a continuous muzzle flash. If you've shot semi-automatic, handguns or rifles, you know, the muzzle flash is punctuated by each bullet. This was a continuous burst, and even just the sound of it, right? It was more like a kind of sound.
Well, what happened was we heard the first round, and you know, you're standing inside and you kind of look at each other and you're like, was that what we thought it was, or is that fireworks? And then immediately after that was when everybody was like on the floor, because it was like literally coming, you know, we could see it through the door happening.
Wow.
Yeah.
Now you're a musician, so like you play all the time, weekends, probably weeknights. I've known some guys that play trumpet. Like, I don't know if maybe you know Barney Floyd. He's a pretty good trumpet player that plays with everybody. I mean, you name it, he's played with them. And he was telling me about the crime that him and the musicians and just other people, it's kind of scary working because you have to walk back to your car at midnight. Stuff like this is happening. How do you feel as a musician? Like, this is your job. Do you feel safe? Is this what you want to keep doing? Like, how do you even go about that?
Well, yeah, that's, you know, I think the thing I've kind of been saying to some people who have been asking me that is just that, you know, if you needed a sign that continuing to do what you were doing, you should approach it differently. I think somebody pointing an automatic weapon at you in your place of work and firing is a pretty good sign.
Wow.
You know,
that's crazy.
You know, and I understand that obviously random incidences of violence and tragedies are just the way of the world. It would be unreasonable to think that, you know, anywhere you go has to be absolutely perfectly safe, or that, you know, nothing like should ever happen. But I think down here it's a step way too far. I think it's a step too far. And I think the fact that the response from municipal services, I mean, the message is loud and clear. You're on your own, you know, and that's the thing I've been telling my friends is like, at the end of the day, I think that it's in a way helpful that happens so that we can kind of think about what's the best way to arm ourselves with knowledge and defend ourselves and handle this sort of thing if it ever happens again. But you know, that's also really a shameful, sad fact to be like, I have to think about how to, you know, either defend myself or what is best to do if a shooting does break out, how best to respond to make sure like my friends and loved ones there are safe.
Wow.
Yeah.
It's actually pretty interesting because we've kind of like felt this ongoing thing of like, you know, everybody knows like New Orleans is unsafe. You even talk to people like here in Metairie, like they're like, oh, we don't go to New Orleans. One of our friends was like, oh, we don't go to New Orleans after 3:00. Like it's just a thing. And so, well, we both, Matt and I live uptown. Matt lives more closer to the Bywater area. I mean, we've been in a little bit closer proximity to a lot of the incidents here in the city. I live about 5 minutes from Costco, and we go to Costco regularly. A lot of our friends are like, nobody goes to Costco anymore. It's known to be unsafe.
They had a lady that got robbed or shot or carjacked at the
Yeah,
Costco.
there's been several incidents there, but now there's a heavy police presence there too.
Wow.
So, and that's just about everywhere. I mean, a lot of people like club owners are like, we have to have security. But, you know, we've kind of lived in a certain sense of like, I wouldn't say necessarily denial, but we're like, you know, it's not as bad as we think it is. Like, it's okay. Like, you just have to kind of be careful. But I think this was like a really big wake-up call for us. And we actually have been like, you know, looking more eagerly into other cities to live in, which is pretty heartbreaking for us because I'm from here. Like, this is home. We love the culture here. There's nowhere like it. And Matt's lived here for almost 5 years now. He loves the industry here. It's great for him and his work, and he's passionate about playing here. It's one of the best places to live as a musician, but it's kind of to the point where it's like, is it really worth our lives? Like, what we want to build foundations on to be in the middle of this.
And I have like one more thing I want to ask, since y'all are in the center of all of this, and this is just opinion, like, because in New Orleans, there isn't coverage of like what I would call what happened at the Hi-Ho Lounge was like an act of terror or a mass shooting. I mean, you got tons of people, you got somebody with an automatic weapon just spraying bullets all over the place. Why do you think there's no attention to that in the city? What is your thoughts on that?
Well, they know they can get away with it because nobody's going to react to it. I mean, if this was the one time that we were involved with it, like and the police didn't show up, like, I have to assume that this is like a reoccurring thing in a lot of areas.
That's a very sobering thought, feeling, and it's a weird disconnect having been there and then the day after not seeing any news coverage. You drive by the place and people are setting up to just have another normal night. It's like, if that can happen in your own experience in life and it's not on the news or anything, you definitely have to think that sort of thing probably happens even more frequently than you really think. And it's just not being reported. Because I do think, I mean, in any other town, if that happened in Lacombe or in Madisonville, I mean, I think every police officer in the county would have been there. They would have had a SWAT presence. They would have set up a perimeter. They would have been there for 6 hours, and it would have been the only thing on the news about that happening.
Yeah. So,
and I mean, in some ways, I honestly just think it's the corruption of the city. I think it's all, it's almost like the Brazilification of the government, just that the corruption is so endemic and persistent and entrenched that it's just part of the way of life down here. And I do think to live in the face of that, a lot of people adopt just sort of I don't want to say a laissez-faire attitude, but just to sort of like, well, this thing happens and thank God we're safe and I'll see you tomorrow night. And I think that's a way to cope with it, but I also think it's just sad, and I don't know what the answer is, but I would like to think that the answer would be something more than just, this is just the fact of our life here,
Yeah, I think a lot of people would kind of, I guess, necessarily blame the government, right? Because the police didn't do what their job was, what we're paying taxes for them to do, right? But I mean, it's just it really just feels like they kind of just turned a blind eye and they were like, well, this is what happens. Nobody's hurt. Let's just go on about our business. Like, no trying to figure out or even try to like get out and interview people. The only news article that was posted the day after was a Reddit thread. And on the Reddit thread was like all these people like, yeah, this has happened here before. Or what was the other thing that they were saying on that thread? That they were probably targeting someone because there's some, there can be some sketchy people hanging out around there, like, gang related violence and stuff.
Yeah. And to be sure, I mean, I don't know who found it, maybe the bartender or something. We did find a bullet casing at the scene. So that was with, I guess.
There's evidence. There could have been an investigation.
That's going to the owners or something. And my buddy, the drummer, his car has 2 bullet holes and maybe a bullet lodged in it. I didn't quite know if he said that the bullet was lodged in it or not.
Were you able to see what caliber was on the shell?
My buddy and I looked at it. It was not marked in any discernible way that we could have said like, oh, this is a 223 or a 30-06 or something. It had
it was a rifle.
21. It said something like 21 and maybe like an LG or an RGP or something on it. Huh. The best we could deduce was that it was probably something close to size of like a 223 or 5.56, and it was maybe some kind of like ex-Soviet sort of round, or it
could have been. I've heard of guys in the city with AK-47s. I think that's a bigger round. I don't know if it's similar, but I mean, it could be
It was
anything.
a big case.
It was for sure a rifle cartridge. So he was either using a rifle or a short-barreled rifle. It was not a handgun cartridge.
Yeah. Wow. Well, I appreciate y'all sharing this with me. I hope it gets some more attention to the toilet bowl that is becoming New Orleans, and we'll see what happens. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.